Hello everybody, my name is Ryan Lobo and I make films and I take photographs among many other things. And nowadays everybody takes photographs. I mean everybody owns a camera, whether it be a digital camera or a cell phone camera. Just yesterday I was in an auto rickshaw headed to Bangalore airport, a very long drive. And my auto rickshaw driver was using his cell phone to take pictures of girls wearing short dresses on the road. And I said, what are you doing? He said, sir, for a collection, sir, collection. So a friend of mine, Achal Prabhala, recently said that photography has become like a language of sorts. And you have your different forms. You have your vernacular forms, you have your older forms, you have your advertising forms. But owning a camera is like owning a pen. Everybody has one. But very few people can actually use that instrument, that tool, to create something meaningful and enduring and of worth to humanity. So how do we transcend the needs of the present in order to create meaningful work? And when I say needs of the present, I mean our own egos, the demands of clients, whatever zeitgeist is present at any given point in time, or the good or bad opinions of the planet. Nowadays, when I go onto photography forums online, you see all the discussions about equipment. You know, I bought this lens, I bought that camera body, so on and so forth. But it's not so much as about buying the best equipment as it is about equipping oneself internally in a moral and aesthetic sense. That's very important. So I believe that I am a part of the photographs I create, the films I create. And the work you create from such a place can develop power and enduring power in the world. So now I'm going to show you some photographs and go through some stories which will hopefully illustrate these points I've just gone through. And they aren't pretty pictures. Some of them are very badly taken pictures, but they do stand for something larger than just a photograph, than just a pretty picture. So I co-produced this film in Liberia recently, and it involved working in what was once a war zone under, on occasion, some rather unsafe circumstances. And during the process of filmmaking, we found ourselves in a slum populated by former child soldiers. A lot of these were people with very violent histories who had suffered terribly and who were also addicted to drugs like heroin. So it wasn't an especially safe place. And while we were filming, a mini riot of sorts broke out for various reasons. And I, of course, wandered away from the rest of the crew to get some photographs. And before I knew it, a group of young men, all hammered out of their minds on whatever substance, caught me and like dragged me down this alley into another area. And they wanted my camera equipment, of course. And I was not about to give it to them because I knew the second I gave it to them, my life wouldn't be worth very much. This young man in the photo which you see looking at me had a machete down his trouser leg. And the other guys over there were trying to instigate him to take out the machete and wallop me with it. And so I could give up the camera. And the second he'd advance, I would instinctively raise the camera and take his picture, okay? And I was terrified. I was extremely scared and totally incapacitated with my fear. So several times I tried to get this guy to hit me with a machete. And each time I would ask him to pose and say, hey, just pose, hold on. And miraculously he did. You know, maybe it was because he was on drugs. I'm not too sure. And I lied to this guy. I said, I'll make you famous, man. I'll put you on the cover of the magazine. And he was like, why are you taking a photo of me, brother? So I was like, I'll make you famous. And then his friends were like, hey, what do you mean make him famous? Make us famous. And before you know it, all my would-be assassins, if you will, were all posing for photographs. Okay? Everyone wants to be famous, you see, even former child soldiers, you know? So I remember lifting up my digital camera, and digital cameras, as you know, have these little preview windows at the back and looking at these photographs. And I ended up looking at myself, and what looked back at me was a really terrified version of myself. And that was when something really special happened, something really wonderful. I suddenly felt no fear. Just the act of watching myself seemed to separate myself from my present moment, and I was somewhere else. I wasn't operating from a place of fear. I was operating from another place, a place of watchfulness. Two rather grim-looking men, right after this, dragged me off again. But this time I wasn't scared, as you can see. And they, of course, asked for a photo, so I took one. But I wasn't about to hang around, and then I did what was probably the most sensible thing I did that day, which was run like hell. And I got out of there. But the point I'm trying to make here is this act of watching, this act of being aware of one's own motivations and emotions through the creative process was an incredibly empowering thing for me. Most of our lives, we aren't really in control of what happens outside ourselves, but there is some measure of control for what happens on the inside. And creatively speaking, this is essential, I feel, you know. On another note, everyone keeps saying, you know, it doesn't matter what equipment you use, but if it was a film camera, I'm not too sure what might have transpired. So I was very lucky I used a digital camera here. How we bear witness can influence a story very profoundly, and who we are is that witness, you know. So we were commissioned to do this film in Delhi on violence against women, a very dark story. And we went to Delhi, and we got permission to shoot in a very low-income area where this girl had been murdered by her in-laws over a dowry dispute. And her parents agreed to meet us and be interviewed and have photos taken of the whole process. So this is a picture of the two brothers of the girl posing with a picture of her. But to cut a long story short, I have to do that now. When we reached the house and they saw the film crew, all the women started screaming and wailing, and there was a very dramatic mourning taking place. And while I don't stand in judgment over their grief, as a film crew and as a photographer, we had directly influenced what was happening over there, and I was not very comfortable with the whole scene. So this is the kind of photograph which is actually distorted by the projector, which editors love. You know, we call it poverty porn, which is showing people like horrible things so that they feel better about their own lives very often, and it sometimes serves not much of an illustrative purpose. But in the middle of all this drama, that little girl you see on the top left hand, she struck me as somebody who had maybe transcended her circumstances a little bit. And I was immediately drawn to that. I empathized with this little girl who was very quietly standing there looking at whatever was going on around her. And she was this little sister of this girl who'd been killed. Now, that was what I was drawn to, because I found that dignified in this whole situation. And I took this photograph. Okay, now you all will. So a photograph can reveal the photographer or some aspect of the photographer, not necessarily the other way around. And so a photograph is often inviting an audience to stand in your own shoes, to experience the world from your viewpoint, from your standpoint. And that's a moral and ethical one. So the question to ask yourself, the question I always ask myself is, where does the goodness lie in yourself, and how are you going to find that in the world, and maybe what do you have to offer of that to the world and maybe expect it in return? So what you have within yourself, you can offer the world, and you can expect it back. And essentially things can go full circle, and this is one story about that. Okay, so this is a story I've actually talked about before, but it's a story on the Delhi Fire Service. And I had shot a film for National Geographic. I was one of the cameramen on that project a few years ago, and it was released on National Geographic. And whenever it was released in Delhi, it was a film about the heroic efforts of the Delhi Fire Service. People would call in great numbers, and they'd compliment the fire service. And it did wonders for the good image of the Delhi Fire Service. And a year later, I was commissioned to do a still photo project on the same outfit, the Delhi Fire Service. So on the first day of the shoot, I found myself in a fire truck headed to a slum fire. There was a slum which had caught on fire, and there were a lot of people apparently present in and around the blaze. So we were headed there. And when we reached the slum, something quite extraordinary happened. The people who lived there were very angry because we had come late due to bad traffic. And when our vehicle arrived, they attacked the fire engines. You know, they started throwing stones, and some guys, I could see them on the side getting kerosene, and things looked a little dicey. So this went on for a while, and we had to run out of the trucks and in order to avoid the mob. And in the middle of all this madness, a young man on the roadside suddenly ran up to the truck, climbed on top of the roof. I'm not too sure if that's one of them, and started exhorting the crowd not to throw stones at the firemen. And this went on for a while, and the stone throwing continued. But slowly, gradually, the stone throwers kind of stopped what they were doing. And some of the young men who were in the crowd throwing stones joined this young man in preventing the crowd from attacking all of us, you know. And this went on for a while, and eventually the fire was the firemen managed to regroup, and these same men who were throwing stones at all of us ended up helping the firemen put out the fire. These same men. And I was very tired later. I was walking back to the car, and I met this young man, the first young man who had gone on top of the fire truck. And I thanked him. I said, thank you for what you did. And what prompted you to put yourself between the mob and us? And he said, no, a few months ago I saw this film on National Geographic. It was about the Delhi Fire Service. And these guys have a hard time too. So it was the same film I had made. And I thought I would stop them from burning your truck. So, thank you. I read this lovely article recently in the New York Times written by a man named David Brooks called "It's Not About You." And it meant a lot to me. So what I'm going to say now is in fact inspired by that article. Nowadays we often hear these litanies of what's called expressive individualism, which is march to the beat of your own drum, follow your passion, find yourself. What's unsaid is that these journeys are supposed to result in peace and fulfillment. But peace and fulfillment are not objectives in themselves. They're byproducts of how one engages with the tasks of one's lives, and one does not necessarily have control over that all the time. The purpose is not to find oneself in one's work, but it's to lose oneself in one's work, eyes wide open. It's an ongoing process that, and doubt, suffering, and tedium are sometimes a part of that journey. When we read a biography, very often, we aren't drawn to what people did to quote happiness. I mean, we aren't drawn to when people quote happiness in their lives, right? Buying a new car, making a lot of money. What we admire is what people did to quote unhappiness in the pursuit of excellence. What we admire worst is not, what we admire the most is not happiness, it's excellence. And I find that surrendering to what is larger, and when I say larger, I mean being true to oneself, being honest, no matter the circumstances or the good or bad opinions of the world, can often lend a great amount of power to one's work, power enough to give it a life of its own. Thank you.